Jaxson Dart is the reason Ole Miss is going to take down the South Carolina Gamecocks. We give you the answer key before Saturday's test.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's episode, we're talking about why Ole Miss should win the South Carolina game. Lane Kiffin and Jaxson Dart will need to overcome a hostile atmosphere, especially with the crowd going after Juice Wells. But Dart has answered every single challenge this season and his whole career. He has not had a losing streak since 2022 when he and this offense really started clicking. And when they do that, they are unstoppable. I fully expect this week to showcase their best performance of the season. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. Don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC and Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They provide other perspectives on college football, the SEC, and heck, even Ole Miss, so check it out. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bet guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So this is my favorite episode of the weekend, the Why Ole Miss Wins episode, when I give you the reasons why I think Ole Miss will be victorious on Saturday against South Carolina. And this game is an interesting game because of the storylines and dynamics that happened before the game. This is an absolute must-win for Ole Miss. Ole Miss absolutely has to win the game. This is the defining game of the season for Ole Miss. And we learn what they are exactly on Saturday. Whenever you look at it, Ole Miss needs to recover because their margin for error is gone at this point. Ole Miss was not expecting a loss to Kentucky at this point. They have to win at South Carolina and they have to win at LSU. If Ole Miss does that, they're going to be fine. But those are the overarching things that are kind of hanging over Ole Miss football at the moment. Ole Miss has the capability and the talent to do that, and they're going to be favored against South Carolina, LSU, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and possibly even Georgia, depending on what happens with their season as well. So Ole Miss has the ability to win all these games. They just have to do it. And the one thing that stands out is these are the reasons that I think Ole Miss are going to win this. They're going to win this game. First of all, Jaxson Dart has answered nearly every question that we've had about him before. I don't think anybody should doubt him here. And number two, with Henry Parrish and Matt Jones on the injury report, does that mean Ole Miss turns to a Bentley? We'll have to pay attention to that. And the atmosphere is actually going to be a blessing for this Ole Miss football team that has to avoid getting in their own head. If they're constantly worried about the atmosphere and having to concentrate so much to be successful, there's not going to be those lulls that they get into their own head on. Really interesting stuff. But let's go back to my take on this one. Jaxson Dart is going to be the reason that Ole Miss is going to rebound against South Carolina. I know, really harsh take. I mean, Jaxson Dart is going to be big in a football game. The quarterback is important. Yes, but this is more along the lines of what Jaxson Dart is and how he does. Jaxson Dart in his career has had 3 or 4 fairly down games in his history. And in that history, he went, let's go back to 2022, his first year starting, and against Kentucky in 2022, he was only 15 of 29. He only threw for 213 yards. He only had an interception in that game. It's a situation he did not have the best in the game in the world. How did he rebound from that? Against Vanderbilt the next week, he was 25 of 32, 448 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He had a couple of bad interceptions, but he had a much better game. It's like he moved up a different level. When you look at the Arkansas game, everybody remembers that game in Fayetteville in 2022. That was the famous Cole Cubic, Jordan Rogers talking about Lane Kiffin to Auburn and stuff. Jaxson Dart was only 21 of 36, 240 yards. He threw a touchdown and a pick in a game that Ole Miss lost. That was another one that like multiple touchdowns got called back because of penalties, but let's digress on that. The very next week, they played Mississippi State. He was 30 for 38, 250 yards and 2 touchdowns in a windy rainstorm, including a 99-yard drive to get within 2 points at the end of the game. Jaxson Dart played really well. Let's move into 2023 to where there were 3 bad games that Jaxson Dart played a year ago. First of all was against Alabama. He was 20 of 35, 244 yards and an interception that day. The next week, 26 of 39, 380 yards and 4 touchdowns and no interceptions at LSU. Had 7 rushing attempts in that game for 50 yards. Against Georgia, he was 10 of 17, 112 yards with an interception. He also injured himself in that game. So he went into the next game not being able to just raise his arm above his shoulder. So before everybody talks about the opponent, remember, he was injured that week. He was 24-31, 310 yards and 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. And then that injury got to the Mississippi State game and he played, let's say, poorly because he hurt his shoulder. He was legitimately injured by the end of the 2023 season. 14 of 26, 96 yards and a touchdown, no interceptions. He followed that up playing against the number 1 defense in the whole country, threw for 379 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions as Ole Miss took apart Penn State. The point in this is that Jaxson Dart has a history of bouncing back after he has a mid to bad game. So I feel bad for South Carolina. Ole Miss had their players only meeting. They've been in a very bunker mentality during the week. I think they're going to come out and have their cleanest performance of the season. And a lot of that's going to do to Jaxson Dart and the way he plays. Jaxson Dart against Kentucky in 2022 and against Kentucky in 2024 did not play particularly well. He was just a little bit off. The ball placement and the passes weren't there on Saturday. Mark Stoops apparently has a way to get at Jaxson Dart. 2 games, and he's had not great performances. I think we can give Mark Stoops in Kentucky credit for that. Now, I do think South Carolina is going to try and do some of the things that Kentucky did in that game, but if Ole Miss comes out in their normal offensive game plan, I don't know if it's going to matter that much. Jaxson Dart is going to have a big game against South Carolina, 2-3 touchdowns, and if Ole Miss scores over 24 points in this game, I don't know if I see any way that South Carolina can win with the way Ole Miss's defense is playing at the moment as well. Now, the Juice Wells factor in this game is a big deal. 14 catches, nearly 20 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns for Juice Wells. The whole state of South Carolina is going to be showing up to show their displeasure for Juice Wells, and Ole Miss is kind of caught in the crossfire on this situation. But let's not forget, Jaxson Dart is the leading passer right now in the entire country. 113 for 146, 1,815 yards, 13 touchdowns, 2 picks. And Trey Harris is the best wide receiver in college football, that there's a chance that in game 6, he could go over 1,000 yards this weekend. He had 49 catches, 804 yards, 5 touchdowns. He is absolutely electric. Jaxson Dart fell into a little bit of a trap of making him too much of the focal point a week ago. Jaxson Dart, if he comes through and has his typical 350 to 400 yard performance, no interceptions and 3+ touchdowns, that generally happens after a game like that Kentucky game, Ole Miss is going to be fine against South Carolina. Now, South Carolina is going to try and mimic a lot of stuff, I think, what Kentucky did. I do not know if they can. I think that Ole Miss is going to show a variability in their offense and run the ball. This could be, I think, the week that we see Ulysses Bentley getting the ball a little bit more, because Henry Parrish and Matt Jones are both on the injury report come Wednesday night, as of Wednesday night. They're probably both going to play, but you probably want a different, fresh back to show up in that thing. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. So with Henry Parrish and Matt Jones on the injury report, could this be the week we finally see Ulysses Bentley in action? Stay tuned as we dive into how the Rebels might shake up their backfield. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. It's a place to bet on which side of Ole Miss being 9.5-point favorites over South Carolina in Saturday's game, or the over-under, which is right now at 53.5 points. You know, Ole Miss would have been right near that number by themselves through most of their games this season. If you get a hunch like that in the middle of the game, at FanDuel, you can check out the latest stats. You can view their live play-by-play and so much more on the same page that you placed your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And a new partner at Locked On Ole Miss is College Corner. It's your one-stop shop for all things Ole Miss. You know, game day is just around the corner, and this week fans are rocking powder against South Carolina. As they garnet it out, that powder is going to look fantastic. So head on over to the College Corner to pick up your perfect game day gear. And Scott just got a bunch of new Realtree Galaxy tumblers, and more stuff is on the way constantly about that. They're going to debut that against Oklahoma. So I'd expect more and more merch to hit these stores there. So whether you're gearing up for football, basketball, or baseball, College Corner has you covered. They're located off of Sisk Avenue in Oxford, right across from the new Chick-fil-A, and getting to the store is a breeze with plenty of parking. For those of you out of state, no worries. Visit collegecornerstore.com. They turn around orders super fast. Trust me, this isn't a sales pitch. College Corner is where I get all of my Rebel gear. So visit collegecornerstore.com or stop by College Corner in Oxford, Ridgeland, or Flowood today. So this is a weird game because the availability report, I think that's what they want it called, but it's an injury report. And whether you decide whether or not you want to believe what's saying, because Ole Miss is basically making a casualty list that looks like that at this point. And they're putting anybody on there that is complained about anything on their body is going on the injury report as at least questionable. And so it's one of those situations to where you can kind of just pay attention to who's out right now, really put a lot of stock into that out position, and then look and see how the availability report changes over the course of the week. But the problem on this availability report is Henry Parrish Jr. and Matt Jones both ended up on it. Henry Parrish Jr. is second right now, barely second, with 70 carries for 489 yards and 8 touchdowns. They've run the ball pretty well. Matt Jones is having a good season as well. So that leads the question, does Ole Miss see Henry Parrish this week? Or Ulysses Bentley this week? Does Henry Parrish and Ulysses Bentley, do they become the front runners on the staff? Is what we thought that was going to happen on Saturday going to happen moving forward? Is Ulysses Bentley going to be the guy that shows up? Now, Ole Miss this year ran the ball less than they normally do, and their outside run game at the moment is not where it needs to be. Ole Miss did this same thing at the beginning of last season, if everybody remembers, in the run game. Ole Miss did not run the ball at a rate that anybody expected them to. Remember, Quinshon Judkins averaging like 2 to 3 yards per carry over the course of those first 4 games. He ran for 46 yards or something like that against Alabama, and everybody's like, well, is this waking up? And everybody's like, Ole Miss has a problem on the offensive line. What are we going to do? If you remember what that was like. Well, against LSU, they completely got right and ran for nearly 300 yards, had Judkins at like 180 yards. Bentley ran for nearly 100, including like a 60-yard touchdown in that game. It was part of that offense, kind of the awakening of that offense. And I think Bentley is getting ready for his October emergence on Ole Miss's football team. With those running backs and Henry Parrish and Matt Jones a little bit nicked up, I think you will see Ulysses Bentley at least get more carries. Now, whether or not Ulysses Bentley takes advantage of those carries, I can't say. I'm just saying he's going to get the opportunity. And if he gets the opportunity and breaks free and does the stuff that we know that Ulysses Bentley is capable of, Ole Miss is going to make it to where he plays a good part of the rest of the season. Honestly, I'd like to see Dominic Thomas or Rashad Amos as well. Ole Miss spent way too much money on the offseason for them not to play. Whenever you spend millions of dollars that are just on the bench for depth, that is problematic at best. So I would like to see better reps against with a Dominic Thomas, with a Rashad Amos, honestly, with a Ulysses Bentley. Utilize the depth that we have. We talked about during the offseason that Ole Miss recruited everybody for a 16-game season. That's all we talked about. It's like, this is for a 16-game season. That's why they're accumulating so much depth. Well, 5 games into the season, the O-line rotations have not changed over the course of the game from what it normally is. The wide receiver rotations have not changed from what they normally are. And the running back rotation is honestly a little bit less than the first time that Kevin Smith was in Oxford, when they had Snoop Connor and Jerry and Ely and Henry Parrish at that point. This year, it's been a 2-man show. I think that begins to change this week, because it has to. Whenever you've got a nicked up Henry Parrish Jr. and a nicked up Matt Jones, that stands out. The players to watch in this game is, obviously, we talked in the first segment about Jaxson Dart. I think everybody needs to watch Ulysses Bentley. And then TJ Daugherty on defense, that is going to be a big key as well. The front 7 on this defense is going to be very important. Chris Paul is also going to have a role to play as well. The difference between this team and what Kentucky did is Kentucky's 2 best offensive players were Dane Key and Barrion Brown. And that's the reason that Brock Vandegrift was even able to perform at his level that he was doing. This South Carolina team, their 2 best players are likely Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders. So that tells me this is a front 7 game. You do not have to worry about the pass game at the level that you were against, say, a Kentucky with Barrion Brown and Dane Key. But you do have to worry about, if you miss a run fit, Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders have the ability to take it 75 yards to the house, which they have at recent times in this game. Now, I expect to see Robbie Ashford a little bit as well, but defensively, I think Ole Miss has the front 7 to match up with what South Carolina wants to do offensively, and Ole Miss giving up less than 2 yards per carry and leading the SEC in sacks and all of those explosive plays. I think that's going to be interesting against the South Carolina Gamecocks. Listen, this game is going to be nuts. It's going to be absolutely nuts. And that is probably a good thing, honestly, for Ole Miss football. It's not going to be nuts like when you're going down to Tiger Stadium, but with all the noise surrounding Ole Miss's football program this week, it'll be nice for them to be in a stadium where they can just lock in, because they have to lock in. I would be much more concerned if Ole Miss was playing Vandy this weekend after the Kentucky game. I'd be much more concerned if Ole Miss was playing Mississippi State this weekend or Florida this weekend. Some place to where you're going to walk in a 25-plus point favorite. And it's a bring your own energy type of football game. Those games would scare the bejesus out of me. But I feel all right about the South Carolina game. I genuinely do. I think this is a good matchup for Ole Miss. I think if you can neutralize their defensive ends and make it to where they don't wreck the game like they did against Kentucky, because Kentucky could not neutralize those defensive ends. And because of that, South Carolina won a game 31-3 that they only had 200 yards of offense. That's weird, but that shows what those defensive ends can do in a football game. So I do think that Ole Miss needs to get the defensive line running side to side. You need to do that with the tempo and everything else. You need to make them work so the tempo can be more and more effective. Because in the LSU game on September 14th, the first quarter of the game, LSU's offense did nothing. South Carolina's defense absolutely shut down LSU's offense. Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams at running back, they couldn't really break free. They just couldn't. Then LSU saw something offensively, and that was running the equivalent of an outside zone play with an inside zone with an offensive line that kind of moved and let this over-aggressive South Carolina defensive line run themselves out of the play. So you were essentially running inside zone, but outside the tackle whenever you actually hit the line of scrimmage. LSU was able to find some success on that. And that caused the defensive line to become a little bit less aggressive, which opened up the passing game a little bit. And LSU's passing game can be really good whenever they start flowing and they get in rhythm, and the passes that are 5 to 7 yards downfield end up 15 to 20 yards downfield. And LSU all of a sudden took over that football game. South Carolina was up like 17 to nothing. That's a game that LSU came all the way back and won the game. And a lot of that has to do with what they did in the running game and how it affected the passing game and how South Carolina's defense got affected with what LSU was doing. LSU, or South Carolina, if they know where your quarterback's going to be, if they know it's a pass, Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart, they are going to find a way to get to the quarterback. They are really good players. They're probably both NFL players. Kennard leads the SEC, I think, in sacks. Stewart is going to be an NFL first rounder potentially one day. You need to neutralize them and South Carolina's defensive front. If you can do that and get to where you can run the ball, that's going to open up the passing game, and Jaxson Dart is going to carve them up over the course of the day. If you don't, if you allow it to look a lot like this past Saturday, where the defensive line kind of mucks up what you're doing, you stay off the field, you don't get first downs, and all of that happens, you're in a dogfight again. And if you get into that dogfight in the fourth quarter and it's a one-score game, even a one-score game, I'm going to sweat profusely because that place is going to be so jacked up at that point. 2009, Ole Miss, basically South Carolina invented Sandstorm. That's when Sandstorm got its start. And that has become a thing over the last 20 years that they do. This is the first time that I think Ole Miss has gone back to South Carolina since then. We all know that a highly ranked Ole Miss team can struggle against South Carolina on the road. South Carolina is a very difficult place to play. Whenever you talk to the Believe in Georgia Dogs podcast, Israel Troop talked about Williams-Brice and how hard it is to play there. It can be very difficult. So if Ole Miss plays clean, and they absolutely have to play clean, no penalties, none of that stuff, no turnovers. If they do that, tackle relatively well, they'll win the ball game. If they don't, it's going to get squirrely. Rocket Sanders ran for 225 yards or something like that in 2022 against Ole Miss. That ability is there. Lenore Sellers can run the football. He is a bigger quarterback that likes the quarterback run game. Ole Miss has one of those guys on their teams as well in Jaxson Dart. So we'll see exactly how it goes. Ole Miss should win this game. Ole Miss is favored for a reason, even at 9.5 points. Ole Miss should win this game. All right, we'll be putting the finishing touches on the South Carolina Gamecocks and getting ready for a big test on Saturday, so stick around for that. First of all, though, Game Time is your place to get Ole Miss tickets. You know, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. You know, there's not a bad seat in Vaught Hemingway Stadium, but Game Time makes it to where you can see exactly what the view would be from your seat before you buy the tickets. Their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of that good stuff. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might even be able to help you out with tickets too. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so let's put our final touches on the South Carolina Gamecocks game. It's like we said going into the break. Ole Miss is a 9.5-point favorite for a reason. They have the best passing offense in all of college football. They are going to scare South Carolina. If you're going to be able to run the ball, you need to run the ball so you can really scare that defense, because if they can focus on one side or another, it will be problematic. When you look at the line right now, Ole Miss is favored by 9.5 points. The over-under is at 53.5 points. Like I said, it makes sense. Everybody is seeing this. Everybody's talking about this. Will South Carolina cover? I think maybe the opportunity is there if Ole Miss plays sloppy, but if Ole Miss plays well, I think Ole Miss is going to cover this line. If you look at the final score, I'm predicting is Ole Miss 31, South Carolina 17. And I think that Ole Miss is going to be able to score because of what we talked about. Jaxson Dart rarely, if ever, has 2 bad games in a row. I expect him to come in and, for lack of a better word, kind of light up that secondary just a little bit. So we'll see exactly how that looks. I think South Carolina is going to figure out a way to score the ball in the game. The 7 of the points might even be a fumble return, a pick six, or something on special teams, because Shane Beamer does all of the Beamer ball stuff that has made his dad very famous. But South Carolina on special teams, they block punts, they return kicks, stuff like that. So I expect that South Carolina could put something together on special teams as well. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a front 7 type of ball game. It just is. And it's going to be up on the offense to block the defensive line. The offense that can do that the best is going to win the game. These are the 2 best defensive lines in the Southeastern Conference sacking the quarterback. Ole Miss, I think, has 18 and South Carolina has 12 or something like that. So they get after the passer. The running game and getting people off their spots and getting them to move is going to be very important. The offenses are similar. They're not the same thing. They don't do the same thing, but they're similar in their makeup. Loggins at South Carolina and Charlie Weiss Jr. and Lane Kiffin, this is all from that Baylor tree. Loggins learned from Kendall Briles. They met at Arkansas and all this stuff like that. They brought that to South Carolina. So when South Carolina gets going, we all know that that offense can be a handful. But without a downfield passing threat, and this goes without saying, Ole Miss needs to eliminate the penalties on the back end of the defense. If they get too handsy, it'll get problematic. Ole Miss does not need to have penalties that save drives. And Kentucky won the game essentially because at the end of the first half, there were 3 penalties that saved the drive. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But I do think Ole Miss is going to win. I do think Ole Miss is going to cover. And I think Jaxson Dart is going to have a fantastic day. And I expect that due to the injury report, we are actually going to see Ulysses Bentley. So if he takes advantage of his opportunity, good on him. But I think this opportunity might actually be here depending on the injury report. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the #1 Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin, get you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description. You don't even have to search for it. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. Our texting program sends you notifications on everything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial. Experience the future of college sports. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description. For those of you watching on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, go Rebels, handle South Carolina boys.